So a lot of people are looking at the SEC dominate right now, and you're coming off an all-SEC national championship game in Georgia versus Alabama. Everyone's issue, or at least a lot of you, have an issue right now, and the issue is there's too much SEC dominance. There's too much regionality to the sport right now. I don't really like that. What can we do? What can we do to beat Alabama or beat Georgia? What can we do to just compete with the SEC? Well, the first thing I want to reiterate is you're not having to beat the SEC. I haven't, in all due respect, I haven't seen Ole Miss in one of these title games. I haven't seen Kentucky in the playoff. I haven't seen Missouri sniff a playoff spot. You're not competing against the SEC as a whole. It had to be a pretty tough task. That's a pretty tall order. Tough to beat Greg Sankey. You can beat these teams. You can compete with them. It's just not easy. Like, what did Georgia just do? Georgia just showed that if you follow a blueprint and you execute it to near perfection, you can win a championship. Now, some people would lead you to believe, well, that's true, but Georgia has access to these magical resources that the rest of us don't have access to. That's false. Georgia has access to resources Iowa State may not have access to. They certainly have access to resources. Here's my nightly whack-a-mole on Akron for no particular reason. Yes, they've got access to things our friends in Akron, Ohio don't have. But do they really have access to stuff that USC hasn't historically been able to have at their fingertips, or Texas, or Ohio State? Of course they don't. What's happening is you had a blueprint and you had a value system and you had it followed. You had it carried out to perfection. There is a lot that you have to get right to win a championship. That's obvious. Doesn't matter which conference's helmet sticker you have on the back of your head. But there are ways that you can do this, and you don't have to be affiliated with the SEC to do it, and you don't have to be Clemson to do it. Like, there are several programs out there, if you'll notice, over the past 10, 15 years that have underachieved mightily, and it's in no correlation whatsoever to what the SEC's done. Nothing about what the SEC has been doing has kept Miami down. Miami's kept Miami down. Ditto for Texas. Ditto for USC. Those are three examples I keep using. Let's dive into this, though. Here's a crazy stat, by the way, as we dive into this. I told Jesse, find me the most eye-popping stat about the SEC over the past 15 or so some odd years as you can. He came to me. He said, I think I got one. I said, come on, Jesse, bring it. He said, in the past 16 national championship games, there have been 18 SEC teams play for a title. So I said, Jesse, I know you came in a little early today, and I gave him a caffeine drink today. It threw him for a loop. He said, no, I'm right about this. Over the past 16 title games, there have been 18 SEC teams participate in those title games, which means you have multiple years, a la what we just saw, or Georgia versus Alabama Part 1 in 2017, or Bama versus LSU in 2011, where you had multiple SEC teams in there. Yes, it's been a dominant stretch. How in the world do you catch up? How do you match this? How do you compete with it? Here's how you compete with the SEC. Number one, football has to be number one. This sounds so commonsensical, and a lot of programs out there think they've put football number one, but it's not just a program thing. It's an athletic department thing. You got to have football as priority 1 and 1A and 1B, and here's the thing. You can't apologize for it. When someone says, we got to pay some attention to the equestrian team, you can be respectful, but you got to let them know that equestrian team exists because of football. You got to have football at the front of the train, because that's exactly what a locomotive does. It pulls the rest of the train, and you don't apologize for it, and you don't siphon off funds over here that could be used to better football, because better football equals more funding for everything else. You got to have your AD on board with this line of thinking. You got to have presidents. You got to have boards of trustee members. This is where it gets really, really complicated, because as you can see, you got to have a singular vision. They all got to be on board. The second thing you have to do is you have to hire with purpose. You got to go nail the hire. Georgia obviously nailed the hire. It goes without saying Alabama nailed their hire. But that hire has to be able to cast a vision. So leadership's imperative here, but he's got to be able to cast a vision to where it doesn't matter if I ask a nutrition specialist or your defensive coordinator or a recruiting director, hey, tell me what the vision of this program is. Boom, they just rattled it off. And they all give you a version of the same answer. There aren't 15 different play sheets being read from. There aren't 15 different hymnals being sung from. Everyone's on the same page. And that's because purposeful hiring has been executed. You also have to spend. But you don't just spend willy-nilly. I always wanted to say that in the natural progression of a show. You got to spend with purpose. And that really, really ties closely with hiring with purpose. But you got to spend with purpose. Like right now at Florida, I think they're doing a good job of spending with purpose. Billy Napier, as he came in the door, he asked for things, but if they were to have said, why do you need this? He wouldn't have fumbled around. He wouldn't have said, I don't know, just give it to me, I'll figure it out later. I guarantee you Billy Napier had about a 15-point plan for every dollar that he asked to be allocated towards football with. That's how you have to be when you spend. You don't just go put a water park in the football complex because you got the extra money. That's spending. It's not spending with purpose. You've got to properly structure the football program. This is, to me, what's changed the most just over the past 5 years. 5 years ago, if you were to be hired, Brent Venables, for example, at Oklahoma, you hire Brent Venables at Oklahoma. He doesn't need to know how to structure NIL. They don't need to know how to handle NIL. You've never even heard the letters put together. He doesn't need to have a college scouting department because the transfer portal then was not even a fraction of what it is now. Think about what I'm saying. Traditionally, you've obviously had high school scouting and you've had regions where you assign guys, however you want to set it up, but that's basically the extent. You scout your opponents and then you scout kids that you want to bring into the program. Now, you got to have true college scouting departments. You've got to have someone at the University of Oklahoma, and an entire infrastructure for that matter, that understands if a kid that's a left guard for Ole Miss goes in the transfer portal, we need a grade on him. We need to know his background, his history. We need to know his injury. We need to know everything about him because we need to know how he fits. No different than if he was a sophomore in high school down in Philadelphia, Mississippi, than if he's coming to the portal and coming out of Oxford, Mississippi. We got to know. And so that's another thing that you have to be able to have. But also, it could be strength and conditioning. It could be nutrition. Everything top down has to align with the vision that's been cast, hopefully because you've hired properly. And then the vision has to be carried out at a high level because you have spent with purpose. But even if you check all those boxes, I know what a lot of you are out there thinking. Maybe you were nice enough to let me finish making the points, but I know what a lot of you are out there thinking. You're thinking, okay, let's say we do every bit of that. You're still forgetting one key thing. Georgia is in Georgia. And so they got all those bottomless resources and they got everything aligned. They got the talent pool. Yes, they do have the talent pool. They don't have exclusive rights to the talent pool, and they don't reside in the only talent pool, is what I'm trying to tell you. That's the big misnomer. The big misnomer is, well, we'd love to be able to do all this, but hey, kind of kick your can down the road and put your nose down as you say it. Doesn't really matter, because fate has decided, or in this case, geography has decided, we're not going to be able to compete regardless. No, yeah, you can. You got a couple options here. Okay, either you can put together a top 5 roster and have good enough quarterback play, or you can put together a top 10 to 15 roster, but you need to have elite quarterback play. There are several different ways you can go about this, but I want you to think about a 6-hour radius around your campus. This could be USC. It could be Texas. It could be Oklahoma. It could be Tennessee. I think Tennessee has been a sleeping giant within this aspect for a long time. I've spoken about that before. It could be Florida State. And there are several ways to do it traditionally. But I also want you to think about 2 new things that have entered the equation here. NIL and technology. So let's talk about 3 things. Think about what NIL and technology combined have done to erode the meaning of geography when it comes to where a kid is going to play his college football. Kids used to not leave home a whole lot. The country used to feel a lot bigger. Technology has really shrunk the country perceptionally in the mind of a 17-year-old kid. You are routinely communicating with folks 3,000 and 4,000 miles away from you. The country just doesn't feel that big. It doesn't feel the way that it would have felt to you if you were coming out of high school in 1993. Secondly, NIL is a huge factor here. A lot of times, even if kids don't mind leaving home, they haven't left home because family cannot come see them play. One of the hidden benefits of NIL that people behind the scenes are talking about more and more is it is allowing the freedom financially for families to travel long distances to see their kids or their son, brother, whatever, nephew play football. That's a big deal. But then also I want you to think about the transfer portal. Look at where kids are going in the transfer portal. We're going to talk about the portal in just a second. But the portal shows you that geography matters even less. Like it may even be still that some kids are tied to a certain area of the country when they come out of high school. Dude, look at where kids are going in the portal. It's almost like the NFL free agency market. No one even cares. No one even remembers your hometown at that point in a lot of cases. Some kids do want to get closer to home. A lot of kids are just going where they can play. I mean, there was a kid when I was still down in Columbus There was a kid who played for Auburn High School, which is in Auburn, Alabama. He had some local interest. He committed to Florida. He just entered the portal, just went to play for Utah. Then no one cares anymore. So you've got to be strategic about this, okay? If you're Michigan State, for example, and Mel Tucker's already showing you how to do this, yet you don't have the same kids down the road at Norcross or in Columbus or Macon or Alpharetta that Georgia does right in their backyard. You may not have that, but what you do have is you got a good brand, you got rock solid leadership, you got access to the portal, you can get creative with NIL. You have to structure, this is where the strategery comes in, you have to structure things properly in your football department. If you do, you don't have to sign 100 kids per cycle, guys. It's about 25 kids per cycle. You're telling me you can't structure things properly to where you get 25 high-level players per cycle, enough at least to where you put yourself into that 10 to 15 range roster-wise. And at that point, if you're there, if you got the 13th best roster in the country and you hit it out of the park at quarterback, you can win a national championship. I don't care what part of the country you reside in. I don't care what the average temperature is in September or October. You can win a national championship. Which programs are capable of doing what I just said? Because really what you want is a list. So I thought about this for a second. They got to have good enough access. I mean, the University of Alaska is probably not in this equation. You got to have good enough access to high school talent. You got to have deep enough resources to where you can reasonably execute things even if everyone is aligned. And the third thing is the alignment. If you've got that top to bottom administrative alignment, you got the vision cast, you got the right leader at the helm, which programs could pull this off if everything was in line? USC could do this. Miami could absolutely do this. Florida State could do this. North Carolina can do this. Notre Dame can do it. Ohio State can do it. Michigan State, Penn State, Oregon, Texas, Oklahoma. They can all do it. There's a second tier where you could push back and convince me that programs like both of the Virginia schools, both of the Arizona schools, Baylor, TCU, Georgia Tech, a lot of you don't buy into. I do. It's got to be perfect there. West Virginia, like there are ways in the transfer portal NIL era especially, there are ways where if everything were aligned, any of those programs could compete for a national championship. It's just so hard. It's like I'm a weather nerd. I know how many different atmospheric factors have to come together for a tornado to form. Most of the time it doesn't happen. But man, when they do happen, it's really incredible to see. And so if it ever does happen at Arizona State, if it ever does happen at West Virginia, if it ever does, I can't believe I'm going to say this, if it ever does happen again at Texas, it's going to be incredible to see. The fact of the matter is, especially with these premier programs, historically, like a Texas, like a USC, there's nothing about the SEC that's held them down. They've held themselves down, and the SEC's come in their backyard and said, well, if you guys aren't going to win and keep your talent home, we'll take it. I mean, think about the state of Florida. Florida State and Miami. I've long spoken about how imperative it is for them to right the ship. Florida right along with them. Right the ship, keep the talent home. You want to see something balance, at least the talent pool in this sport, that would go a long way in doing it. Look, that lets you compete. That's all you're looking for. Just get in the arena. Compete. Don't look around and say, who's going to beat the SEC? You! You go do it. How about that?